Hey everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we have the second part in our paid instructional series for Warbonds. Now today we'll be covering units and combat. If you didn't see part one, we covered the setup and the basics, and then part three, which will be the final part, we'll cover the abilities, dueling, and war camps. Units make up the core of your army and represent the characters that you will directly control the movement and actions of. Units are represented both on the battle map as well as the initiative table. Any ID piece that has this symbol here will go on the initiative table, as this shows you where it will go when placed on the initiative table. These components are used to track each unit's position, status, and turn handling. Units also have reference cards, which are placed around your personal play space. These cards track accumulated damage and resource tokens of each particular unit. And as you can see, they also can be used to reference the stats and unique abilities of each unit. During a game round, each enabled unit will take a turn according to the initiative score placement on the initiative table when the CTI enters its space. A unit's owner will handle how its abilities are performed during its turn. All units can perform one move ability and one action ability. And these can be performed in any order or not at all. And then once a unit's turn ends, any applicable end-of-turn abilities or effects will be triggered, and then the CTI will move forward again on the initiative table. There are two types of units, warlords and squads. And while it may be common sense which is which, you also can tell by this symbol in the top left corner. It should be noted that squads obviously consist of multiple members within a single unit, and because of this, squad units will bolster your army size based on the number of remaining squad members indicated here. Warlord units are the core of each player's army. If a warlord dies, then its owning player is defeated and eliminated from the game. Each warlord is unique, providing their player with a unique playstyle and strategic options. A warlord's alignment, found here, influence how you can play the game and which units you can deploy. A good warlord cannot deploy evil units, and evil warlords cannot deploy good units. A warlord themselves has an army size of 1. Also, only a warlord may spend leadership. Warlords do not use loyalty in any way and ignore any loyalty effects. Warlords also have the ability to duel other warlords, which we'll discuss in the third part of this video series. Squads make up the bulk of your army, and each unique squad has 4 copies available for deployment. A squad is a group of 1 health characters that collectively function as a single unit. So keep in mind that a squad's health is its squad size, which also represents its army size. This means that as a squad takes damage, its army size will dwindle. So for instance, if one of these Valkyries had 5 damage, then it would be down to 4 army size. A squad with any amount of damage is automatically less effective and will receive -1 APD to its stats. Squads do utilize loyalty and do not utilize leadership. The maximum number of squad units that a player can have actively deployed is 6. Each unit has a corresponding reference card, as we've mentioned, and when a unit is deployed, its reference card should be pulled from the pile and placed in your player space. These cards provide information on a unit's stats, current status, and unique unit abilities. The unit's listed subname, in this case Garish, needs to match the underlined name on its matching ID piece. When a unit is dealt damage, players will place damage dice on the unit card's portrait. Damage dice track how much damage has accumulated on a unit. Accumulated damage counts upwards from 0. Players will also place any accumulated resources such as leadership, loyalty, or supply directly on the unit's portrait. As we've mentioned, initiative ID pieces have this initiative icon on them. This piece is placed on the initiative table and is used to track when the unit will take its turn during a game round. When a unit is first deployed, it's deployed on the disabled side. This is for the one that goes on the initiative table as well as the one that goes on the battle map. This piece will leave the initiative table only when the unit dies, retreats, or is successfully recalled. The piece without the initiative icon is the battle map ID piece, and this is placed on the battle map space. This piece can be moved around the battle map during the unit's turn. It's important to realize that only one unit ID piece can occupy a ground terrain space on the battle map. During play, it's possible that a this round or a start of turn effect can affect one or more units. To handle tracking these various effects, players can place the black or the white reminder tokens on top of the unit's battle map ID piece. The black token would be for this round effects, and the white token for the start of turn effects. The tokens would then be removed either at the end of the game round or when the unit begins its turn. In order to add units to your army, they must be deployed. Units are deployed either from wild terrain or from war camps. Players can have up to 7 different units in their army, one of them being a warlord and 6 of them being squad units. By default, when a unit is deployed, it begins with 0 loyalty. During play, you will utilize the player guide to look up units for deployment. Any war camp that is in the encampment form can be used to deploy a unit. If it's in this form, it may not deploy a unit. Also, any unoccupied wild terrain space on the board can be utilized to deploy new units onto that wild terrain space. And remember, units by default will deploy disabled. Each player starts with and can have a maximum of 7 army color tokens. Deploying a unit requires that you have one of these available, like this. If you do not have one available, then you cannot deploy a unit. Also, as we mentioned before, there is a limited number of copies of the various unit types. Once all copies of a particular unit are actively deployed, no player will be able to deploy another copy of this depleted unit. But of course, once units die, recall, or retreat, their reference card and ID pieces are returned to the card pile, and at that point, they may then be deployed. Also remember that if your warlord has a good alignment, they cannot deploy an evil unit, and vice versa. Since the Phalanx Bandit is simply a law unit and does not have the designation of good or evil, then either good or evil could deploy it. All units, whether or not they have flying, such as the Pack of Arales, must be deployed on an empty ground space to begin with. Later, if a unit dies, remove that unit from the board as well as its army color token, and the token is then placed in the graveyard. Wild terrain provides nearby units the ability to deploy a wild unit. So we've mentioned deploying into wild terrain. That requires a unit to be near it, which then gains the deploy wild unit ability, and they then can deploy a unit into the wild terrain. The unit that deploys the other unit may be either a warlord or a squad unit. When deploying with a war camp, you may deploy into any of these 4 orthogonal spaces. A war camp can also deploy a unit directly on top of its space. And keep in mind, war camps can only do so when in the encampment form. So we've mentioned several times that units will be disabled when they are initially deployed. Keep in mind that the effects of being disabled are as follows. The unit will have its turn skipped by the CTI. A disabled unit cannot lose loyalty, but they can gain loyalty. And of course, it won't be placed directly on the ID piece. It'll be placed on the reference card. Disabled units can still be attacked while on the battle map. By default, all unique unit abilities of a disabled unit are not active or activatable. Also keep in mind that since a disabled unit cannot lose loyalty, they cannot be affected by the Persuade event. Loyalty reflects the unit's bond towards their army and warlord. The maximum loyalty a unit can hold is 6, and excess loyalty gained beyond that is lost. Keep in mind, only squad units will utilize loyalty. And as we mentioned, when they are initially deployed, they by default start with 0 loyalty. A unit with 0 loyalty remains in service, but if they would have to lose loyalty, they will then be recalled. A unit that automatically recalls themselves in this way follows the exact same procedure as if they perform the recall universal ability. We'll discuss how that works near the end of this video. Anytime a unit gains loyalty, it's placed on their portrait. The attack abilities of law units will have this check presence indicator here, and all warlords will also have a check presence. These labels are a reminder to gain loyalty for law or chaos units after performing the attack against an enemy unit. When a law unit attacks an enemy unit, if they are in their warlord's presence, they gain 1 loyalty. After a warlord attacks an enemy unit, that warlord's chaos units within presence each gain 1 loyalty. Neutral units are never affected by check presence. If a warlord loses an honorable duel, then their chaos and their law units within presence will lose 1 loyalty. Various unique unit abilities can manipulate loyalty. When these abilities are performed, or their listed conditions are satisfied, ally or enemy units can gain or lose loyalty based on the details of the effects. So for instance, if the Valkyrie kills the Bleeding Horrors, you can see Holy Crusader, this unit gains 1 loyalty after it kills an evil unit, and the Bleeding Horrors are neutral evil, so the Valkyrie would gain 1 loyalty for killing them. If there's an ability that affects loyalty but also has something else that it does, the portion of it that is not related to loyalty can still affect a warlord, even though the warlords don't have anything to do with loyalty. So loyalty obviously can be used to prevent automatic recall, but there are some other things it can be spent for as well. For instance, loyalty can be used to perform Power Strike. This will cost 1 loyalty and allows the unit's attack to ignore resistances. A unit may perform a dual interruption. Squad units can pay 1 loyalty to perform dual interruption, and this allows them to attack or block during a duel. A unit may cancel its recall by spending 1 loyalty. And at the end of each game round, a unit may spend 3 loyalty to provide their warlord with 1 leadership. Through leadership, players will be able to mitigate the negative impact of unanticipated consequences. All warlords start the game with 0 leadership, and their leadership may never become negative. The maximum leadership that a warlord can hold is 6, and as with loyalty, any excess leadership is lost. Each warlord has unique abilities that will help them gain leadership. When a warlord performs the dual universal ability, they gain 1 leadership. Warlords are able to spend their earned leadership to perform a variety of impactful game-changing effects. Each warlord will have unique abilities that allow them to spend their leadership. In this case, Tangus has Fire Frenzy. A warlord can spend a leadership to decline a duel. The Power Strike universal ability is available to the warlords, but costs them, of course, 1 leadership rather than 1 loyalty. A warlord can pay 1 leadership to cancel the recall of a recalling unit. And of course, there are the Persuade event and the Influence the Public event, which we discussed in the previous video. Attributes are additional subtypes for units. In this case, the Little Anarchists have Small, Humanoid, Bestial, and Mount. All units will have at least 1 attribute. These are referenced when 1 or more units are interacting with each other. For example, when a unit targets another unit with an attack, some bonuses may apply based on whether their target does or doesn't have an attribute. The most important attributes to review are Flying, Small, and Undead. Flying units have their movement type enhanced with wings, as you can see here. This means that they can move into and occupy sky terrain. Small units cannot block enemy movement, and enemies do not block small movement. Undead units accumulate damage when receiving life damage, and undead units are healed when receiving death damage. Let's go over the various unit stats that you'll find on the bottom of the unit cards. The maximum health points of a warlord are found here. When their accumulated damage meets or exceeds this amount, they die. The maximum squad size is found here. When the accumulated damage of the squad meets or exceeds this amount, they die. This is the unit's initiative, which we've discussed several times already. This symbol indicates basic attack damage and is unlisted for most units, and when unlisted is considered 1. Normally, you'll see it modified in this way with +X or -X. which increases or decreases that base of 1 by whatever number you see. This is the attacks per turn. This stat indicates how many initial attacks a unit will make when performing any one of their unique attack abilities against their targets. Squad units have an asterisk, as you can see here. This is just a reminder that they will lose 1 APT if they have accumulated any amount of damage. And if a unit does not have an attack ability, then their APT will be listed as 0. Presence is a warlord stat that represents the influential aura that emanates from warlords. This affects both ally and enemy units that are within its listed range, in this case a range of 3. A warlord's presence will cover both the ground and sky terrain that is within the indicated number of spaces. This section is collectively known as the unit's defenses. From top to bottom we have vulnerabilities, immunities, and resistances. In this case, this warlord is vulnerable to death damage. Being vulnerable to a damage type increases received damage by 1. And that increase applies to each APT. This is the immunities row, and in this case indicates that this warlord is immune to fire. Immunity to a type of damage fully negates and prevents all incoming damage of that type. And this row is the resistances of the warlord. Resistance to a damage type decreases received damage by 1. This damage decrease applies to each APT. In this case, they are resistant to life damage. During each unit's turn, the owning player will have the option to move its ID piece across the battle map. Movement can be done either before or after a unit takes an action, but it cannot be split where the unit partially moves before the action and then partially moves after the action. All units have a listed movement speed seen here, indicating how many spaces they can move. So as you can see, this unit has 3 movement. The icon next to the number 3 shows the type of movement, which can either be on foot or mounted. That can of course be further modified if there are wings to indicate that it's flying. A unit moves 1 movement space at a time, like this, and it must move orthogonally, either north, south, east, or west. It is not allowed for a unit to move diagonally like this. When moving into a nearby space, subtract the destination terrain's movement cost from the unit's remaining movement speed. So 1, 2, 3. Units may continue moving so long as they have remaining movement speed that satisfied the next terrain's movement cost. Plains terrain always has a movement cost of 1 for land movement and 1 for mounted movement. Wild terrain, on the other hand, has a movement cost of 2 for land and 3 for mounted. Enemy war camps do not block movement, so this unit could go 1, 2, 3, for instance. However, movement through enemy units is blocked unless the unit is small. And if this unit moved 1, 2, 3, then all of its movement would be taken, since moving into this space cost that extra movement. It's also important to realize that only during turn abilities can be performed in the middle of a movement. Now, as we've mentioned, certain units have the flying ability, and the battle map is considered to have 2 layers of terrain spaces: the ground that you see here and the sky directly above it. Flying enhanced movement allows the unit to move into the air for a cost of 2 movement. Doing so would allow a second unit to occupy that same space of the battlefield. The flying unit can then move to another space of the battlefield through the air for the cost of 1 movement, and they can move from sky to ground for the cost of 1 movement. Since a unit landing from the sky would then occupy the space below it, a unit in the sky cannot land in a space that currently is occupied on the ground. This also means that a flying unit in the sky could not move into this space because this sky space is currently occupied. Units in the sky will never be able to reach grounded units with melee attacks. Ranged attacks can target either ground or sky. If a unit has the small attribute, as you can see these do right here, then it can move through enemy-occupied spaces, since enemy units do not block the movement of small units. But that also means that small units do not block the movement of other enemy units. You can always tell from looking at the ID piece if a unit is small by this blue arrow on its movement icon. Any space that has been enhanced with a road reduces all movement costs down to 1, including if the space were wild terrain. Additionally, roads provide nearby units and war camps with the universal ability, Free Road Movement. Free Road Movement allows a unit during their turn to land from the sky or take 1 free movement onto a nearby road ground space. This does not use the turn's movement and can be used by flying units that occupy sky terrain in order to land onto a road-enhanced ground terrain directly beneath it. Also, a war camp that is in the encampment form can still perform free road movement. Because free road movement is a during turn ability, it can be used before, during, or after movement of that unit or war camp. Units have a health icon and value which indicates the amount of damage they would need to accumulate to die. In this case 32, and in this case 9. This icon for warlords is considered their maximum health points, and for squads their maximum squad size. When a unit's accumulated damage reaches this listed value, that unit dies. Non-undead units such as these accumulate death damage, while undead units accumulate life damage. When a warlord is damaged, they take the full brunt of that damage and it accumulates on their card. When they're healed, simply remove the damage by the amount healed. A squad, however, consists of multiple members that collectively make up the entire unit. Each member of that squad effectively has 1 HP. For each instance of 1 or more damage received by that squad, only 1 member will be lost. This means that squad units can only receive a maximum of 1 damage per attack. Any excess damage is lost. However, the downside is that squad members cannot be healed because they're already dead. So instead, a squad unit must be restocked. Any effect that states restock will result in replenishing a squad unit's lost members by reducing their accumulated damage by the indicated amount. As you might expect, a restock effect will not have any effect on a warlord. So as we mentioned, a unit dies when its accumulated damage meets or exceeds its squad size. When this occurs, the unit is returned to the recruitment bin, its card is returned to the card pile, any resources that were held by that unit are lost, and the army color token is placed into the graveyard. It will now be unavailable until the collect event. It's important to realize that these color tokens are only placed in the graveyard when a unit dies, not if the unit recalls or retreats. If a player's warlord dies, that player is defeated. All of that player's units are returned to the recruitment bin. These units are not considered dead and instead have simply retreated from the battle. It should be noted that the loss of squad members does not satisfy any condition of unit killing or death. This means that a squad unit must lose all of its members for it to effectively die for the purposes of various effects. Also, it should be noted that dying from sacrificial payments does not count as being killed. War camps and units on their turn can target others with an attack. By default, units or war camps being attacked do not react. Unit attack abilities are distinguished by either being melee with this arrow here or ranged with this arrow here. Attack abilities are listed at the top of each unit's unique abilities section of the reference card, as you can see. If there is no attack ability listed, that means that unit cannot attack. By default, performing an attack ability will take an action, but some attacks may also require a payment or sacrifice to activate. As you can see, Holy Bolt requires to pay 1 supply. In a case such as this, that payment must be resolved before the attack can be executed. An attack must also have at least 1 valid target within its ability's targeting range. It should also be noted that by default, all attack abilities can only have 1 valid target. However, if it is specified that an attack does have multiple targets, only one damage type can be selected, and it then is applied across all targets of that ability. Melee attacks must always target a nearby enemy, meaning adjacent, and they cannot attack from ground to sky or from sky to ground. An attack which is ranged will have a number after the range symbol indicating what its range is. In this case, Holy Bolt can target any object within 2 spaces of the attacker. Ranged attacks can always target either elevation, ground or sky. This even means that if the attacker and target are directly above or beneath each other, they can still be attacked. When a unit or war camp attacks, the user must calculate the APT, or attacks per turn, against each of their targets. The APT is listed here and here on the cards. Keep in mind this is their initial base attacks per turn. Additional APT bonuses and penalties may be applied, which can increase or decrease the calculated APT. For instance, you can see these vermin bombers have a number of ways to adjust their APT. An attack must fully utilize its calculated APT against each target. An attack cannot be made using a partial amount of this. It should also be noted that no matter what the modifiers are, the APT will never be reduced below 1. It's important to realize also that when an attack has multiple targets, the APT will get calculated separately for each target of the attack. It does not get split or subdivided across multiple targets. This means that the APT could differ depending on the target. Squad units will always have this asterisk next to their APT just to remind you that if they have taken any losses, their APT is reduced by 1. Once the APT is calculated, the attacker then calculates the amount of damage that each APT deals against its target. This is known as the base attack damage, or BAD. By default, all units in war camps have a base attack damage of 1. So let's assume that the Valkyrie's base attack damage here would be 1 after all modifiers are considered, and that they are at full strength, so their APT is 3. Then you know that their total potential damage is 3 times 1, which equals 3. But keep in mind, various effects, including the target's defenses, can increase, decrease, or negate the base attack damage. And while APT can never be reduced below 1, base attack damage can be reduced to 0, though it cannot ever be reduced to a negative number. As an example, you can see Tangus's axes deal +1 base attack damage. He also has 5 APT. This means that since his axes deal 2 normal damage instead of 1, since he has +1 base attack damage, then he could potentially accumulate 10 damage to a target. So we just mentioned normal damage. Let's discuss the various damage types. This symbol indicates normal damage, as we mentioned, and this represents physical impact and injury. This symbol indicates magic damage, which is used by arcane practitioners. This indicates fire damage, which is an elemental damage type. This indicates thunder damage, another elemental damage type, which is effective against armored units. This indicates ice damage, which is effective against magical units. This is acid damage, which is effective against most units. This indicates life damage, which actually heals non-undead units, but damages undead units. And this is death damage, which heals undead units while damaging non-undead units. This row right here indicates vulnerabilities. In this case, 1 vulnerability is listed, though multiple could be. Each listed damage type in the vulnerabilities row indicates that the unit receives +1 damage per effect or APT. This is similar to granting an attacker +1 basic attack damage. So in the case of Scarred Rufus the Red, he has a vulnerability to death damage. The next row we see here is damage immunity. All units will have a row of defensive stats known as immunities, though not all of them will have something actually listed there. Each listed damage type in the immunity row indicates that the unit cannot receive damage or healing from the listed damage type. In this case, Scarred Rufus the Red is immune from fire damage. Even a Power Strike attack cannot be used to bypass a unit's damage type immunity. The row below that shows damage resistance. Each listed damage type in the resistance row indicates that the unit will receive -1 incoming damage per effect or APT, similar to granting an attacker -1 base attack damage. In this case, Scarred Rufus the Red has a resistance to life damage. It should also be noted that Power Strike will ignore a unit's resistances. Some attacks will have a versus condition, such as the Thunder Spear versus Armored or the Magic Volley versus Elemental. In each of these cases, you can see that +1 APT is gained when facing that particular enemy type. If the bonus indicated does not have a versus condition, then it is understood to be in effect against all enemy types. So this Magic Volley would get the bonus against the Valkyries, but the Thunder Spear would not get the bonus against the Begotten Witches. When a unit or war camp uses an ability that targets in-game objects, the player goes through a selection process to identify which in-game objects are to be affected by this targeting ability. If a targeting ability cannot identify a valid target, then it cannot be performed. Both enemy and ally in-game objects can be selected as valid targets when using an attack ability. All attack abilities are inherently considered targeting abilities. Keep in mind that while units can target allies, they cannot target themselves. Additionally, terrain is not considered a valid target for an attack ability. Targeting abilities will indicate the range or distance, as we've mentioned before. In this case, Spellbook has a range of 2. So for the Council of Mages to attack these Valkyries, they would have to be in range, and as you can see, 1, 2, they are within range 2. Some Warlord abilities, such as Battle Pride, have a targeting range based on that Warlord's listed presence stat. The within presence targeting range works in exactly the same manner as other targeting abilities, and so presence is 3 for Tangus, and so in this case, ally units within presence gain +1 loyalty, and as you can see, 1, 2, 3, this ally is within the Warlord's presence. The targeting range works the same, except it's based on the border size of the war camp. It should be noted that units can only target a war camp if they are within its borders. Recalling a unit is a 2-step process that incurs a bit of delay before the recall is considered successful. The Recall Universal ability allows players to return unwanted deploy units back to the recruitment bin while freeing up a deployment slot and gaining a 1 loyalty refund. When a unit is recalled, the first step of the recall process happens immediately. The initiative ID piece is flipped to this side and placed in the recall column. The ID piece on the battle board will also be flipped to the disabled side. The second step occurs when the current turn indicator moves onto the recalled unit. At this point, the player that controls this unit will decide if the recall is canceled or succeeds. If the recall succeeds, then a 1 loyalty refund will be placed in the level slot for the controlling player. And if the unit itself had any loyalty on it, then that loyalty will be placed here as well. Any unit that is successfully recalled will have both of its ID pieces returned to the bin. If a recalling unit dies or cancels its recall, that unit will fail its recall as a result, and the loyalty will not be refunded. Players may run into effects that state immediately recall, in which case they must perform both recall steps in succession before the effect resolves. Keep in mind that a unit can be recalled voluntarily or automatically. The automatic recalls, as we've mentioned previously, will occur when loyalty is reduced below 0 at any point during play. There are times where a unit can recall unexpectedly, or the state of the game has changed to the point where the player would no longer like the unit to leave their army. The option to cancel a recall offers players the opportunity to retain the unit. This is achieved by either paying 1 loyalty from that unit or 1 leadership from their warlord. When canceled, the unit's initiative ID piece is returned to the bottom of their respective initiative score column queue. They retain their disabled status, but will then become enabled again as normal during flip and enable. Another way a deployed unit can leave your army is through retreat. When a player is defeated, all of their remaining units perform an immediate retreat from the battle map. They do not go into the recall column, they are simply returned to the recruitment bin. Retreat does not generate a 1 loyalty refund. And that concludes part 2 of our Warbonds instructional series. Be sure to check out the description of this video to see how you can back Warbonds. Also be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't watched that one yet, and part 3, which will be coming out shortly as well. And until next time, if you're bored online, board offline.